go first and hand to you.
Sure.
Good morning. All ready to go? Thank you. You right, Drew? Okay. Look, the Palaszczuk government has made significant progress in tackling domestic, family and sexual violence, but clearly there is always more to do. And just last week we saw the devastating deaths of Kelly Wilkinson and Loy Ramadan. And clearly it's a reminder that not only do these tragic deaths affect the family and friends of these victims, but it affects the entire community. And that's why the Premier and I last month announced the Women's Safety and Justice Taskforce, to be chaired by the Honourable Margaret McMurdo AC. And the Taskforce will look at all of the barriers that women face in the criminal justice system. We know there are so many barriers and reasons why women don't come forward and report this violence, and we know that there are many barriers in the legal process which often adds to the trauma of victims. And from today, survivors, their family and friends, support workers and the broader community will be able to come forward and make a submission in a private and confidential way about their experience with the criminal justice system. So we're inviting women from across Queensland, anyone that has an interaction with the criminal justice system, to come forward and share their story. And it is so important that we hear from women with lived experience. And I really already want to thank those women who have come forward and shown tremendous courage and bravery in sharing their stories. I also want to acknowledge that there's many women who are not ready to share their story, and I want them to know that we understand that, and that their experiences, whilst not shared, are just as important to the government and to the Taskforce. The Taskforce will also be travelling across Queensland, holding community forums and meeting with community leaders. They'll be releasing discussion papers, and they'll be reporting back to government on how best to legislate against coercive control in October, and broader recommendations about improving women's experience in the criminal justice system in March next year. I'll hand over to Margaret McMurdo.
Thank you, Attorney. Yes, thank you for coming. We're very excited today to announce that the Taskforce website is up and running and fully operational, and it is now, as of today, available to take submissions from women and girls as to their lived experience with domestic violence and also their experiences in the criminal justice system. The submissions can be made in a confidential way. They can certainly be made in a safe way, which is very important. Of course, if they would like their story to be publicly shared, they can indicate that to the Taskforce as well. I'm told as I walked in today that we've already had a number of submissions made, so there obviously is a need and an appetite for this Taskforce and its work, and a real need and desire to have, for these submissions to be made. Already the Taskforce has, through me and my Executive Director, been meeting with stakeholders throughout the system, frontline service providers, police, members of the judiciary, and last week a number of the Taskforce members and I went to the Southport Specialist DV Court and met there with the magistrates, saw the courts in operation, spoke to frontline service providers, police, legal aid teams and so forth. So the Taskforce is up and running and well and truly open for business. The website through which submissions can be made is www.womenstaskforce.qld.gov.au.
Justice, from what you've seen from afar so far,
Yes.
is there a crisis around this issue in Queensland? We keep hearing that word a lot.
It's very difficult not to feel that it is a crisis at the moment because we're all so shocked at the violence and that someone could do this to their own loved ones. But these things have happened for years, and one of the important things I think is that we are now much more aware of this. We're giving it a lot more coverage in the media. The community is understanding it much better. There's huge community concern over it. The community is much better educated. I think more women undoubtedly are now making complaints, whereas once they would not. More complaints are being processed through the courts. And so it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And of course, when these terrible tragedies happen, our hearts go out to the victims, their families, and also those who've suffered domestic violence in the past. It's a very traumatising experience for those people and their families. And I do think that it's timely, that we do feel as a community that we want to stop this. We want to do everything we can to stop it. And we are determined that we will implement the best systems possible and keep on refining those systems to make sure that we learn and keep developing so that our society can be a safe place for everyone, including our women and children.
When women go to the police, where do you see there are weaknesses in the system at the moment from what you've discovered so far?
Very early days, so I don't really feel I can properly answer that. But the work of the task force will be looking at that, and we're very interested to hear submissions about where those weaknesses might be and what works, what doesn't work, and what can be improved.
Do you see a role for a special all-female domestic violence unit within Queensland Police?
Very interesting question, and it's certainly something we'd be looking at. I've heard from media reports that all-women police stations in Argentina have proved a great success. So we certainly are not ruling out anything, and that's clearly something that we would investigate and look at.
Senior police have admitted that they failed Kelly Wilkinson. There is now a police investigation into that. Should Queensland Police be investigating Queensland Police, or should it be done by someone outside the service?
Again, a very good question. It's perhaps not for me to say that in the current political climate, but there is strong support, I think, within the community for an independent investigation.
In terms of reference into the review of Black Broad, what are some of the things that you'd like to see focused on specifically? Is it DVO breaches?
Well, the terms of reference, particularly the second part of the terms of reference, are broad. So how we'll deal with that is, obviously, our first issues paper, which we hope to be out by the end of May, will deal with the first part of our work, which is looking at the best criminal model for coercive control and whether domestic violence should be a criminal offence. But at the same time, we're going to issue an issues paper on what themes we should look at when looking at the experience of women and children, women and girls in the criminal justice system. So we will know that later in the work of the task force, once the public's had an opportunity to give us input into what themes should be followed in that second part of our work.
There's been a criticism that October is too late before the task force reports on coercive control. We won't see legislation until the new year. Could it be done any faster, or is this the best way to do it?
Look, I think that the October deadline is quite fast, actually, in terms of the work we've got to do between now and then. And what we're hearing time and again from those in international jurisdictions who've implemented this legislation is that haste is not the way to get the best system. That what needs to be done is you need, first of all, to work out what is the best system for your community. You've then got to, and what they did in Scotland was, they passed the legislation and it was 15 months before the legislation was implemented. And during that time, they trained the police, they trained the first service providers, and they educated the community. So everybody knew what coercive control was. They understood the law. They were well-resourced service providers, well-trained police, knew how to gather the evidence. And then when it was introduced, it worked extremely well.
What's your message today to women who lost hope? They feel like they can't trust the policing system, the judicial process, and they don't feel safe?
Well, I would first ask them to make a submission and tell us their experience, what didn't work, what did work, and turn that disappointment and anger into something positive so that we can learn from their lived experience and make it a benefit to women in the future.
Is there also going to be an opportunity for face-to-face submissions to be made if women want to?
Yes, certainly. We're open to that, and we will be having a number of focus groups throughout the state in the coming months, when there'll be an opportunity for that to be done in a public forum. And if women feel strongly that they would like a private audience, we'll try our best to accommodate that, given the time constraints we have in meeting our report
Is it possible in
requirements.
some cases to stop a male tracking down and inflicting violence on their ex-partner?
We'd certainly like to think so, wouldn't we?
Is it possible? I mean, you can't sit and watch someone 24 hours a day.
No. Look, in the end, maybe that's true. Maybe that no matter how good the system, there are always going to be some that fall through. But we have to make sure that we have the best possible system, and that we continue to refine it and keep it the best possible system, so that we can eliminate risks and protect women wherever possible.
Do you ever feel overwhelmed a bit with the task you have ahead of you? Have you had moments where you thought,
Just about every day. Just about every day. But, you keep one foot after the other and steps, and you keep in mind what you've got to do in the time you've got to do it. And we've got a good team of very committed people. We've got a lot of community support. We've got a lot of support through the sector. The police are giving us a lot of assistance also. And a lot of work's been done already, so we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We'll draw on a lot of work that's already been done, and we are hopeful that we will get it done in the time frame.
Is this one of the toughest jobs you've had to undertake?
Perhaps ask me when it's finished.
But given the reaction, the discussion, the politics involved, it's a big job, isn't it, to get it right?
Look, it's huge. It's a huge task, and it's a huge task to do in the time frame that we have. You could almost have a standing task force to do this role, but I'm very hopeful that with the team I've got, with the community support I have, with the support from the media that we've been getting, that we will be able to produce something truly worthwhile at the end of it. I hope so.
Coercive control is such a complex thing. How do you define coercive control?
Well, I don't even want to go that far today. Obviously, that's something the task force is going to be working on. Issues will be raised in the issues paper. We'll be inviting submissions on that, and I guess you'll have to wait till October to see.
But the people in the general public who it's quite a new concept for a lot of people. For other people, it's not. How do you explain it to the average person what your task force is trying to do?
Well, coercive control is, in a sense, it's a form of domestic violence that is perpetrated not by physical violence, but through emotional, financial, psychological pressures. In a nutshell, that's it. But the exact definition of it will no doubt be something that the task force will have to look at carefully.
Do you think that the systems like policing and the judicial process over the years have tended to favour the perpetrators and not hear the voices of survivors, particularly women?
Certainly when I started in the criminal law back in the early 70s, that was the case. Most domestic violence cases did not come before the courts. They didn't come to the police. Police would not involve themselves in a domestic. And I can remember as a young barrister, as a baby barrister in the 1970s, making submissions to sentencing courts as a saying as a mitigating factor, oh, Your Honour, it was just a domestic, and they'd be nodding, and the police would agree, the prosecution would agree, and it would be a mitigating factor in the sentence. Well, by the time I became a judge in 1991, that had changed, and even by then it was an aggravating factor if it was a domestic. And we've come so far since then. So we've come a long way, so we should be proud of what we've achieved so far, but we've still got a long way to go in terms of educating the community and educating the service providers and perhaps those in the criminal justice system about what the dynamics of domestic violence, why perpetrators are unable to leave and why they often go back to, why, not perpetrators, victims are unable to leave and why they often go back to the perpetrators. So it's very complicated. We've come a long way and we've still got a long way to go, and I think we'll have a long way to go in the future. And we have to keep on top of what will be the best system into the future.
Some questions for the attendant.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Ms McMurdo mentioned there was potential for the Taskforce to have enough work that it could be a standing taskforce. Is something the government will consider going forward?
Absolutely. We're prepared to consider any of the recommendations that come from the task force. As the Honourable Margaret McMurdo has said, this is something that we need to be constantly vigilant about. We have seen so much change. Specialist domestic and family violence courts, specialist teams within the police, but clearly there is more to do, and that's why the task force really have been established to hear from Queenslanders and to make change.
But do you consider this to be the biggest overhaul of the criminal justice system as it relates to women in a generation?
Absolutely. I can't think of the last time a government has looked at women's interactions with the entire criminal justice system. I mean, we know that 1 in 5 Australian women have experienced sexual assault since the age of 15. 1 in 4 have experienced abuse in a relationship. We have to do more to encourage women to come forward, but when they do, make sure that our system is trauma-informed and supports them and doesn't add to their trauma.
And when will submissions increase?
So I think the task force will take submissions right up until recommendations. Yes.
And will the submissions be made public in a de-identified form?
Really that's up to the individuals that make submissions. If they are prepared for their submissions to be made public, we will do that. But a lot of women obviously want to make submissions in a private and confidential way, and we're respecting that.
And in what forms can they take? So people can write in, video?
Submissions can be in writing, they can be audio or video recordings, and as the Task Force Chair has said, there will also be opportunities across Queensland for women to participate in forums and focus groups and for community leaders to be engaged. And there will be discussion papers again, which Queenslanders are encouraged to have their say on.
And the task force will be travelling to regionals?
Absolutely.
How
Yeah.
many locations is going?
I think the task force is still determining that, but as you've heard already, they've already travelled down to Southport to the Specialist Domestic and Family Violence Court, and they will be travelling across Queensland. Okay,
Thanks
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.